Well, hello, good afternoon. Um, I have got a little sort of bit of preamble before I start, and we'll give a few minutes for people to pile in. Um, so for for those of you that have met me before, hello, and for those of you that haven't met me before, my name is Hannah Sylvester, and I am a medical herbalist and lecturer and nature connection walking guide. And I live in Lincolnshire, so a little way away from London. But I did used to live down south and did used to work in London. So it's nice to be able to connect with part of the world that I remember rather fondly. So thank you all ever so much to those of you that have booked on and that have decided to join us this afternoon. It's really lovely to see so many people here. Hi Mel, hi Andrew, good to have you here too. For this afternoon, a little bit of housekeeping before we get going. I'm going to be talking just for a couple of minutes before I sort of properly start my presentation, and then I'm going to share some slides. And then at the end, it would be really lovely if you could stay around and stay with us and ask any questions that you might have, or share any thoughts or anything that the presentation has reminded you of, just to make this a really lovely sharing experience for everyone. So this week, at the Urban Tree Festival, there's been all manner of different tree related events going on, hasn't there? And I really hope that you've managed to take part in some of them as the week's gone by. I've really been enjoying Mel's tree meditations in the morning, which have been a lovely start to the day. And I joined in with Electra Rhodes's writing workshop yesterday, which was a very welcome different side of my brain being used, which was fantastic. So this afternoon, I'm hoping to introduce you to a slightly different aspect of trees that you might have heard about at various points in the week, but I want to introduce you to more about the aspect of trees and how they benefit human health from a medicinal perspective. So my talk today is all about the wonderful lime tree, or the Tilia tree, sometimes also known as the Linden tree. And I'd like to share with you a little about how it's been revered through history, in a number of different ways, but particularly with a sort of later focus on human health, and then also finishing off by sharing with you how you can make your own medicine from the flower. I have a few props. And essentially, kind of in this hour that we've got together this afternoon, just try to raise awareness of the tree a little bit and to help you perhaps see it in a slightly different way, and to really appreciate its beauty and its tranquility, really. So let me start sharing my slides. There's only a few slides. So today's talk is entitled even, The Tranquility of Tilia. And what I've done in this little slideshow that I've popped together is to include mostly pictures that I've taken myself, and a short video that I took myself a couple of years ago. And there's also a couple of other helpful images as well, just to help to bring it to life, really. So what's in a name? Well, there are around 5 species of Tilia that are native to Europe. And I've listed some of the main types of Tilia here that will often be referred to as medicinal Tilias. So we have Tilia cordata, which is the small leaf lime. We have Tilia exeuropea, which is the common lime. Tilia platyphyllos, the broadleaf or large leaf lime. And then there's also Tilia americana, which is the American lime or the basswood. Now, despite the fact that all these different species of Tilia obviously have some differences, they all share commonalities because they're all part of the same genus and the same family. But in terms of their broader uses, what I'm talking about when I talk a little bit later on can be referred to as any of these limes, really, not one specific type. And I suppose I should also point out again here, just for those who maybe arrived just a little later into the session, that the lime that I'm talking about here is the lime tree, so the Tilia tree or the Linden tree. This isn't the lime fruit. That's a very different tree. That's a citrus. So down there on the side of that slide there, you'll see some of the names that lime is known as in different parts of Europe, but also different parts of the UK. And one thing that I've always found quite interesting, quite nice really, is that the very famous botanist and taxonomist Carl Linnaeus actually owes his name to the lime tree. His middle name and his last name are referring to the fact that there was quite a large lime tree that guarded the Linnaeus family home in Sweden. So really the so-called sort of father of taxonomy owes a fair bit to the lime tree. And one of the reasons why I really love the lime tree is because sort of harking back to something that I was talking about with Greg just before we started, it's quite easy to identify and it's so elegant. And you know, on those lovely graceful arching branches, you've got these beautiful broad ovate leaves that are this lovely rich dark green above, and you have these sort of grayer green and sort of more downy underside that feels really rather lovely to the touch. And then on the edges of the leaf, so named the margin of the leaf, you've got these really sharp toothed margins that come to a really definitive point at the top. And then down below at the bottom, you've got this lovely cordate base, and anything that's cordate is to do with the heart. And as you can see there from that middle picture, the whole of that leaf to me really just says heart, doesn't it, really? And as well as the beautiful leaves, on both sides of the screen, but particularly the one on the left, you can see the really gorgeous yellowy white flowers that appear quite briefly, really, in June, that are incredibly rich with nectar and smell incredibly sweet, very honey-like. And they sort of stick out of those sort of paler green bracts at the top, like those little sort of, I don't know, like little finger parasols, aren't they, protecting the flower? So in terms of the way that is used with human health, it's the bract and the flower that are used, not really the leaf, but those flowers really are something special. So what I've got here is a little video of a lime tree on the South Common in Lincoln, where there's quite a few really decent lime trees. And in fact, the road that leads up to it, like many roads around a lot of cities, are lined in lime trees. So you almost, it's like walking down an aisle almost to get to this beautiful open expanse where there's a lovely collection of limes that sway gently in the breeze in the summer. So there's no sound on this. It's probably a good job because it was a really windy day when I took this. So let's just spend a couple of minutes just noticing how it moves in the breeze. It's beautiful, isn't it? So we'll come back to that delicate movement and that aspect of how it moves and the nature of Tilia, really. But I think it's quite important as well to consider Tilia's place in history. And you know, humans have been working with Tilia through the centuries in a variety of different ways, really, right from Hildegard of Bingen's time, the medieval German abbess and herbalist and, well, polymath, really. She is noted to have used Tilia as a talisman to ward off the plague. In Sweden, the inner bark was processed by a sort of a maceration process to form something a little bit like flax that was used to make fishing nets. And here in Lincolnshire and also in the West Country as well, in Devon and in Cornwall, it was woven into ropes and to halters. And then in World War II, many of the tilia that lined the limestone gorges along the Wye were actually felled to provide hardwoods, plywood, for the mosquito planes. And it's really renowned. The wood of Tilia is really, really renowned for its white, close-grained, smooth wood that's obviously has a distinctive place in the aircraft industry in the past, but it is also really very renowned for its fine sort of ability to be provide sort of sharp detailed carvings, really. And when I was looking about its sort of use in this, it wasn't until I started delving into lime carvings that I realized that some of the carvings that you can see in the choir of St. Paul's Cathedral are actually carvings from Tilia. So there's a couple of pictures I've popped on there about some of the carvings that Grinley Gibbons, who was the carver that actually created those carvings, made for St. Paul's Cathedral and also for Windsor Castle. There was some note of him apparently also carving for Chatsworth House, but apparently that's been put into sort of disrepute. It's been disregarded. It's not correct anyway. But you can see there really how the Tilia just, it's quite incredible really how it can be carved so finely. But I think in terms of Tilia in history, it's perhaps most known for its association with love and its association with peace. And going back to medieval times again, the Tilia tree was classed as a tree of love. And it's said that in many villages in Germany, the village greens were lined with Tilia, and apparently under those Tilia trees is where the townspeople, village people, used to meet to decide business. Now, when I was putting this talk together and I read that aspect of it, there was a little part of me that thought, gosh, it just reminded me of that sort of more recent thing that we've heard about in these recent months about the rather famous Hansforth Parish Council online meeting. And I wondered how differently that meeting might have fared if all of those people on that Zoom call might have been stood under a Tilia tree. It's food for thought, isn't it? If they'd all met under that sort of sweet, sedatory smell of Tilia. But as you'll see there, it's many a poem and prose is written about Tilia. And kind of linking back to its use in sort of more recent history, it's a flower that was even recommended as a sedative for those on the home front during the Second World War. So really quite an interesting and very varied history, but one that I think is really quite important to remember. So where does this kind of tranquil nature of Tilia come into play? Well, as far as I'm aware, I'm sure someone will correct me if I'm wrong, but as far as I'm aware, the present family that Tilia is in is the Malvaceae family, the mallow family. And most plants and trees within that family, by nature, are cooling and soothing. And the Tilia really is no exception to this. Tilia is sweet, it's cooling, and it's moistening to the human body. And as I mentioned earlier, the part that's used medicinally are those beautiful light green bracts and those stalks of flowers that come off it. And a bract is like a leaf-like appendage that the flower is attached to. Now, the bract contains quite a lot of what's called mucilages. It's a bit of an onomatic word, mucilage. It sounds a bit kind of sticky and, I don't know, sticky and sweet and oozy. That's kind of what mucilages are. And mucilages also consists of what are called polysaccharides, which are a chemical constituent. And those polysaccharides soothe and adhere to the epithelial tissue in the human body. Now, epithelial tissue is that thin tissue that covers all exposed parts of the body internally and externally and around all the organs. And what it has on those tissues is it cools and it soothes. So for the respiratory system, where Tilia can come in really helpful for is with the removal of catarrh. So it can help the lungs to expectorate phlegm. But, and this is perhaps one of its most common uses medicinally, is that Tilia is a diaphoretic. Now, what that means is that it helps the body to dispel heat. It brings out a fever. And historically, certainly in mainland Europe, that is how traditionally it has always been used. It has always been used as fever medicine, whether that be adults or whether that be children. And it's one of those tisanes, one of those remedies that is very, very safe for children. And you'll see this commonly used on mainland Europe in such a way. Now, because it's cooling and because it can help to dispel heat within the body, what you can also find with it is that for those that experience menopausal hot flushes, so those really, sometimes very violently hot flushes, drinking a cool Tusayne or infusion of Tilia really can help to cool down the body and help to dispel that heat. Now, in terms of other quite interesting chemical constituents that Tilia contains, because it contains many, as does every living thing, two of the other really interesting constituents are saponins and flavonoids. Now, saponins are kind of soapy-like constituents. And flavonoids have a number of benefits on the human body, and flavonoids are contained with an awful lot of medicinal plants, but also a lot of foods. So flavonoid comes from the same root as flavus, which is the Latin for yellow. So most foods that are sort of yellow, orange, going into red, most of those have flavonoids in them. And it's thought pharmacologically that the saponins and flavonoids have this synergistic effect on the blood vessels in the human body, so soothing the vessel walls as well as aiding poor peripheral circulation, so that circulation that goes out to the hands and the feet. And it's thought of as a peripheral vasodilator, which is a bit of a funky phrase, isn't it, really? So it dilates, so it widens vessels. So where that will come into play, often in combination with other plant medicines such as hawthorn or with yarrow, it can come into play with helping those with poor circulation, helping to lower high blood pressure, and there's also quite a renowned action for it helping to lower high cholesterol as well, interestingly. Now, one of the other main effects of Tilia on the human body is that it has what are called anti-spasmodic effects. So it relieves spasm and it relieves tension. So if you think about all those places in the human body where you might feel tension, you might feel tension in your muscles and in your ligaments, and it's really easy, particularly if you're sat for a long time or if you're very stressed, for that tension to appear and to present in the muscles. It's also possible that tension appears in the cardiovascular system as well. So for high blood pressure, for example, the anti-spasmodic effect of Tilia is an additional benefit there, in addition to the saponins and flavonoids that we were talking about before. We might also feel tension in our nervous systems, which might present as anxiety or nervous tension or headache or migraine. So again, Tilia and its anti-spasmodic, but also its calming effects can really have a beautiful part to play here. And, if we're tense and we're stressed, where else are we going to feel that? We're probably going to feel that sometimes in our digestion, in our stomach, in our abdomen. So because Tilia has this soothing and cooling action all the way through those epithelial tissues in the body, it will reach those parts too. So that for, if you get colic or IBS that's brought on by stress, then Tilia, again, it just ticks a lot of boxes, really. So this relation to it in terms of tension is quite key, really. So if you think about maybe that sort of type A person that carries stress in their cardiovascular system, you know, they've got high blood pressure, they've maybe got high cholesterol, they might be sort of more predisposed to future potentially serious heart problems. You know, they get headaches that arise from their high blood pressure. Tilia really, for those types of people, is really quite special. But going back to the title of this talk, The Tranquility of Tilia. Obviously, if you're relieving spasm, that's going to create more tranquility. And if you're going to be soothing and cooling the body, that's going to create more tranquility. But Tilia is really wonderful for bringing more tranquility into a person's life. So for those that struggle with sleep and falling to sleep, and those that need restful sleep, particularly the tense people who struggle to get to sleep in the first place, a Tilia Tusayne half an hour before bed really can help to calm the body enough so that it can fall into a better state of sleep. And it usually does the trick, to be honest. And according to folklore, I did write down this quote and I meant to pop it on a slide, but I'll read it out anyway. It says, "Those that fall asleep under the lime tree might find themselves whisked away to fairyland." I could believe that. If you fall asleep under a lime tree in the height of summer when it's full of flower, yeah, it's really rather pleasant. And emotionally, the Tilia can be used in a similar way to a Bach flower remedy or Bach flower remedy. And Tilia is said to be helpful for those people that give out more than they take in. I think we all know someone like that. And to really calm and to center the emotional part. So all this talk then of Tilia and its medicinal uses, well, what can you do with it? So right in the center there is a really lovely shot of Tilia Tea. That's in a very classic yellow color. I've got some right next to me now. I'll show you when I stop sharing my slides. So a tisane, or an infusion, or a Tilia tea, it's all the same thing, just different names for them, is probably the best way to find the benefits medicinally from Tilia. So one or two of the fresh bracts is quite enough really for a couple of good cups of tea infused for 5 minutes, and it smells beautiful. So you'll see there on the picture on the left, that's me on one of my herb walks that and that one was for one of our local walking festivals. As usual, when you take people out for a guided walk, it rains, and so it did that day as well. So everyone's shoulders were a little bit tense because, you know, when you're chilly and it's cold and it's been raining, you kind of hunch your shoulders up a bit, don't you? And as part of my walks, I always take a huge flask of hot water with me and some cups. And at some point along the way, we'll stop where it's okay to pick something, where it's safe to pick something, where it's not being sprayed, and something that's going to be safe for people to drink as well. And we'll pop some medicinal plants or flowers or whatever we found in the flask, carry on walking for a bit longer, and then pour some out to enjoy as a brew at the end of the walk. So this was us all about 3 years ago now, I think, enjoying a really lovely flask of Linden tea together. And you can see there on the right hand side, the fresh Linden made that absolutely gorgeous bright orange colour. So that's all the flavonoids coming up, all those lovely benefits. You can also make a syrup from the Tusayne. You can mix half of Tusayne and half sugar or honey and combine them together in heat to make a syrup. Herbalists like myself will use tinctures, which are an alcohol water extract that gets a stronger extract out. And then something else you can do that is really lovely, and I have to admit I've never tried, but I really am planning on doing it this year, is you can make a really lovely foot bath from Tilia. So placing the flowers in a bowl and then letting it infuse, really like a huge bowl of tea, and then placing your feet in it. And that can really help with particularly restlessness in children and younger people. So they're just some of the ways that you can use Tilia. With regards to the Tusayne, the tea, obviously, you know, you need to think carefully about how you pick Tilia and where you pick it from. You can't pick from private land. And also you need to respect the rest of nature as well and what needs those Tilia flowers. So sure, if you know that something hasn't been sprayed and it's a safe and permissible place for you to pick a couple of bracts, that's okay. But maybe think about, you know, if you haven't got a Tilia in your own garden, for example, or one that you have got good access to, there are plenty of places where you can purchase Tilia or Linden tea from that will have the same effect. So there's a few references just there, which I'll leave on the screen in case anyone wants to see where they came from. This has been recorded as well, so you'll have access to this afterwards. And I have got a couple of other things just to tell you about sort of my relationship with Tilia when I stopped sharing the slides. But just to leave this on screen just for a couple of minutes, just to say that, you know, the Urban Tree Festival has had such a wonderful program this year, as with last year when I was involved with it in the first time. Many of us are donating our time for free for the festival because it is such a fantastic festival, and many of the talks and events are free, but it really can't take place without donations. So to those of you that have donated, thank you so much. And there are opportunities to donate as well after the event if you so wish. And please do share about the festival with your friends and your family and your colleagues. Professionally, you can find me at the District Herbalist. That's my sort of professional stamp, my professional persona, if you like. And my website's thedistrictherbalist.co.uk. I am fairly active on Instagram. That's probably where you'll get most up-to-date things from me. I am also on Twitter. I do slightly different things on Twitter. But I would really love to tell you about a podcast that I'm starting in June, which I'm calling Edge of the Hedge, which is going to be all about basically about helping people to reconnect with nature using their senses and encouraging sensory exploration of nature, and spending time with the rest of nature. And that should be taking place sort of twice every month or once every month, yet to be decided, but please do keep an eye out for that. Again, Edge of the Hedge has its own social media. The website's not quite finished yet. So let me stop finishing and I'll just tell you about my favourite Tilia experience before I take some questions and see what people have been popping in the chat box. So, hi everyone again. So I would say my first true deep, without sounding too, you know, experience of Tilia was shortly after I graduated as a herbalist. And I was attending a conference for herbalists and people that were herb interested, up at a place just outside of Lincoln called Rise Home, which forms parts of various different educational establishments over the years. And at Rise Home, they have some of the most beautiful lime trees that I have ever seen. And one of the reasons why those limes are so special is because those graceful boughs, they really, you know, they almost touch the ground in some places. So it enables you to get really close to the tree and experience all of its aspects a little bit more close up, rather than it being sort of all, you know, up there in the heights of a tree. And we have got other lovely limes around this area. There's Lincolnshire limewoods, which are absolutely stunning. But the limes up at Rise Home, we were taking part in an afternoon of Goethean tree study, plant study, and we were invited to basically to go and spend time underneath and with the Tilia trees. Now, it was height of June. The Tilia was just out in flower. We'd hit it at exactly the right time. And I will never, ever forget looking up into those branches and the boughs of the tree and seeing the sun glistening down through the leaves and the bracts, and it almost sparkling and looking really quite special, really quite magical, really. And then amidst that, when you kind of relaxed your gaze a little bit more, what you could see was hundreds and hundreds, possibly thousands, of bees. And you were surrounded by this incredible sight of busyness, but a choir of buzzing. And I mean a choir. It was beautiful. And then taking the senses along further from sight down through to smell, the height of Tilia flowering is one of the most pleasant smells I know. It's sweet, it's honey-like, it's rich, it's deep. It smells kind of sticky. It's just delicious. And just spending even half an hour there would have been therapy in itself. But being able to spend a whole afternoon with the Tilia was incredible. And we're a little bit away from flowering time this year, probably about another month, depending on where you are in the world. But keep an eye on those heart-shaped leaves and just watch daily for them starting to reach that flowering time. And when they do start to flower, go and visit them every day and see if you can see a little bit of what I saw back then all those years ago, because you won't forget it, and it really is truly, truly special. So that's the tranquility of Tilia. You don't have to drink it. It's tranquility just being with it, basically. So I promised you I'd show you a couple of things. The carving, I'd actually forgotten about this until I started writing this talk. This is a bowl made of Tilia. So you see that sort of really light kind of, well, it's a very, well, it even says lime on the bottom. Look, I didn't make this, by the way, I bought it. But you can see it's a really lovely, lovely light coloured wood, and it's very, very, very soft. And the grain on it is incredibly fine, absolutely stunning. So you can see why carvers are really, really fond of it. The Tusayne tea that I was talking about earlier, so I've had this brewing for about an hour now, a bit long, doesn't matter. So let me pour some out. So can you see that gorgeous, gorgeous orangey yellow colour? It's just the flowers and the bracts and the hot water, nothing else. And it really, even in its dried form, because I've made this tea out of dried bracts, just there. And it's quite, you can probably hear, it's quite papery, it's quite thin, sort of thin bracts. It dries quite, I don't know, it's quite papery, that's the word I'm looking for. But it smells stunning. And the tincture, again, the sort of the alcohol water extract that herbalists use. So this is not the end of a bottle of Tilia, but you can see that really sort of deep orange colour coming out of it. So what I'd love to do now, whilst I'm having a bit of sip of my Tilia tea, is have a look at the chat box. So let's see what's been going on here. Okay. So Ian has put, gosh, it sounds like an all-rounder aid. I think everyone needs a bit of Tilia in their life every now and again, to be honest. It's quite special. It's maybe not an everyday thing for everyone, but it's a good kitchen tea to have around. Any specific over-the-counter brand names that you would recommend? To be honest, most health food shops will sell Tilia tea. So if you go to any half decent health food shop, you should be able to find some, and it'll be good, to be honest. Rihanna has asked, can it be used topically for the skin as an anti-inflammatory medicine? So it can be used for the skin, yes. It's not something ordinarily that would kind of first come to mind. But certainly sort of going back to the really old herbals of Culpeper and Gerard's and another one that's not springing to mind now. Those both mention its uses for sort of the Tusayne tea being dabbed on as a kind of as a poultice for blemishes and what you can kind of allude to being inflammation. So it's possible, yes. It wouldn't be sort of my first port of call as an anti-inflammatory, but sort of helping to cool and to soothe. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Let's have a look what else we've got here. Any so Maggie's asked a really good question. Any contraindications, for example, those with low blood pressure? So for those with low blood pressure, this shouldn't make the blood pressure lower, but with any case of low blood pressure, you always have to be a little bit careful about what you take. So if you've got low blood pressure, the chances are that your body might not be suited to Tilia anyway. Sometimes if people have very low blood pressure, they're quite cool, and Tilia will make you cooler. So with Tilia being very cooling and very soothing, it tends to be suited more towards sort of either hotter, tenser conditions. So low blood pressure, you could try it. I mean, it's an over-the-counter thing and in tea form, but it probably wouldn't be my first port of call, if I'm being honest. Maureen has asked another very good question, actually. What sweetener do you use with Linden flower tea? I picked some last year and made tea, but found it too bitter without sweetener. I use a teaspoon of maple syrup. What do others use? I wondered about stevia. The bitterness of it, I think it depends on how sensitive you are to bitters, really. I personally don't find it bitter at all, but then again, I drink all manner of different herbs that a lot of people would probably find interesting, to say the least. But to be honest, honey. If you're, if you can have honey, then honey would be fine. Stevia, it's possible. I mean, stevia is a plant. But maple syrup, yeah, absolutely. You could use maple syrup. Just don't put sugar in it. Don't put granulated sugar in it. That really it won't taste so good. And a question about the foot bath. Well, foot baths from made basically with using medicinal plants are kind of used the same way, really. It's herbal medicine, and using plants as medicine is a little bit of an art and a little bit of a science. So the science bit helps for sure, but there's quite a bit of art to it as well, which means there's a certain element of kind of looseness to it in how you apply it. So for a foot bath, if you have like a bog standard kitchen washing up bowl, one of those plastic ones, for example, you can buy in Wilko's or any sort of kitchen shop. If you fill that with warm water, and when I say warm, not straight out the kettle, because you're going to have to put your feet in it, so that old testing with your elbow trick is really quite good. What you need to do, a usual rule of thumb is a handful of plant material to a bowl full of water. So you can either put the dried linden straight in the water, or if you don't want to make quite so much mess, you can put it in a sock. You could put it in the end of an old pair of tights, providing it has got holes in. And you can kind of do the same with bath. You can bathe in Tilia if you want to. You could put some in a little sort of square of muslin cloth and tie it up with a bit of string and tie it over your running bath water. But as long as it's warm, not hot. Someone's asked, what season do you most recommend to experience the smell of Tilia? So that is that time when it comes into flower. And depending on what the weather's like, that can be a really, really short space of time. Sometimes it can be a week, sometimes less. So it's usually June, so sort of mid to end of June. Well, it is up here anyway, up here in Lincolnshire. Be a little bit sooner down in London and the south, and obviously sooner further down into mainland Europe. So keep an eye on those heart-shaped leaves and see what's happening, because that's going to be your indicator as to how it's starting to happen. As soon as you start to see those little blooms coming out, it will all happen very, very, very quickly. Claire has asked a good question about, could you explain how you pick, dry and make Tilia tea? I prefer to pick fresh flowers and dry myself. So those bracts that I was showing you earlier in the slide, so those little sort of finger-like sort of appendages that the flower comes out of. You pick the bract and the flower. They're quite easy to pick. You just kind of nip them with your thumbnail. But to be honest, once they've reached that point of flowering, they're quite easy to pick. And then you can lay them out to dry in the open air. Quite a lot of people now have got dehydrators. You could put them in dehydrators. You can't really hang them, but I've actually dried them by putting a small amount, fairly well spaced, in like a muslin sack, and then hanging that muslin sack to dry with the Tilia inside it. Okay, another great question from Mia. Is it advisable to check with doctor if you're on meds? So this is quite an important one, I would say. If you're on medication, it's a fairly good idea to check with your GP if it's okay for you to take a medicinal plant. You could also check with your local herbalist as well. You could check with your local sort of independent health food shop. Sometimes they can help too. So it is always a good idea to check with any medicinal preparation that you make. Oh, Mel's put something lovely. Cleopatra bathed in milk and lime leaves. Love, beauty and relaxation. I did not know that was lime leaves. That's really, really interesting. And would it be helpful with infant gassiness? If it is, how to use? It would depend on what the cause of the gas is. So it's not what's called, it doesn't have what we would call in herbal terms carminative properties. So that means dispelling wind. So it soothes tension in the digestion. So if that gassiness was a result of tension in the digestion, possibly, but it wouldn't perhaps be my first port of call. It's not going to dispel wind per se. And with children, the way that it's commonly used regularly on the continent, and certainly by herbalists here for infants, is in a tisane, in a tea, just a simple tea, because it's sweet enough for most children to like it, rather than them potentially pulling the face. And someone asked a question earlier about interested to know how I became a medical herbalist. Interested in the science of it, coming from a background in biochemistry. So I personally came to herbal medicine by accident, really. It wasn't intentional. I fell into it and went back to university and studied another degree. And here I am today as a herbalist. So I did a degree in herbal medicine, so a 3-year full-time university degree. And I now teach on that degree. So I'm presently the program lead for that degree, and we teach here at Lincoln, and it's been running for getting on for 20 odd years now, and it's a really lovely course. So I'd be happy to answer any questions about that at some other time. And there is another training school as well, as someone's put in here, Hartwood School, which is the more recent school. That's not a degree. That's a diploma, and they do various different stages of training. But yeah, Hartwood is also very good. But I'm naturally going to be biased because I'm a Lincoln girl. Would anyone like to unmute and ask any questions? Bearing in mind that we're recording, would anyone like to unmute themselves and ask a question? Oh gosh, this is nice. Okay. So thank you all ever so much for joining me this afternoon. I really hope it sowed some seeds about how you can use the Tilia to help you find some tranquility. And I think, this last year, certainly, just finding a little bit of tranquility is welcome, I think, quite a lot of the time. So here's to the Tilia. And thank you for all your lovely questions too.